Howdy, this is Mackenzie Franklin from SideGame LLC here in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Today we're going to be continuing our 5 more board games that left the library series. This is episode 8, and then my replacements for these board games, or games that I think that you should check out that scratch a similar itch. With all that being said, if you haven't subscribed to the channel already, please make sure that you do. It is the best way to help us grow, and for those of you already subscribed, thank you so much for the continuous support. Let's talk about some games that left the library. Our first game is Merchants of the Dark Road, where you play as merchants of a variety of items. You'll be selling those items to travelers as well as picking up contracts, and then taking all those people on the Dark Road. You'll take all of your items, your goods, and then hopefully be able to deliver them to their respective locations. When you do, you'll score money as well as fame and fortune, and your goal is to have an equal amount of money as well as fame at the end, because whatever your lower is of the two, that's how many victory points you're going to get. The positives of this game come from the deluxified components. First off, the art is wonderful. You have these great metal coins that I think are the best in the business, beautiful dice, nice Tetris components with foil siding on some, and then a magnetic board that moves around. Great presentation value. It also has an interesting mechanism where when an opponent goes to market, when they're taking the Dark Road, you can join them and actually deliver some of your goods as well. This leads to you being interested in what the other players are actually picking up and what contracts they're taking, because you may take some as well, so that way you can piggyback off of their successes. Unfortunately, those positives are outweighed by the negatives for me, starting off with the fiddly turn structure and how that leads to downtime. On your turn, you'll be moving one of the dice from your bottom section here and moving it up a row onto the next part of your wagon, triggering a bonus, and then moving based on the dice value, and then performing the action on one of the other spaces. A lot of these actions are going to be short and simple, but others may have you turning things, rolling dice, resolving things, and you're going to be doing a lot of waiting when it's not your turn, and that puts forward a lot of downtime as well, which increases the overall game length and means that you are not playing a lot of the game. On top of the downtime and the game length, the gameplay is also pretty unmemorable. This game has a rondel at its core, where you'll be taking actions in a circle over and over again, and unfortunately those actions are pretty cyclical. You'll be doing a lot of the same thing, and there's no real arc to your experience. You have the opportunity for a level up here and there, but it's generally going to be just a one-time bonus, and then that's what you'll be doing the rest of the game. There's no progressive power balancing or scaling, and the rondel is a big negative here because it does not change over time, and the players do not change drastically as well. You'll just be trying to do the same thing over and over again, bolstering those 2 different tracks, and hopefully having the best on those 2 tracks by the end of the game. And unfortunately, this stagnant system is very hard for new players to jump into. They're not going to understand the connections between the different actions right away, which will lead them to taking very weak turns compared to the other players, and not really having a great time throughout their experience. There are some variable elements of the game, but unfortunately this is another portion that the game is lacking. There's some variable boards set up that you'll be putting with different locations, but the luminescence dice are the only things that are actually going to be interacting with those, which is pretty underwhelming because you only use them so often, and some of the actions are just blatantly stronger than others, and they'll be the ones that you'll be using those dice for, or they're just small variations on each other. So unfortunately, with a lot of repetition, mundane and monotonous cyclical gameplay with no real arc, Merchants of the Dark Road is one that has left our library already. If you're looking for a rondel game that provides that arc, that scaling, and still has that delivery aspect, my recommendation to you is Great Western Trail. In this game, you'll be playing as cattle ranchers. You'll have a deck of cards that represents your herd of cows, and you'll be cycling through those cows by visiting different locations on the board. On your turn, you can move pretty much as far as you want to, up to your current movement status, and stop on any of the buildings that you see fit. If you go to one of your color or neutral building, you can take its effect, or you can stop at somebody else's building and take what's called an auxiliary action for some extra bonuses or fixing your hand. Generally, you're going to be wanting to take one of the main actions on the board, but you have a lot of choices because the board starts small, and as you build more things, you'll be able to customize the board as you see fit. Throughout the game, the trail progresses. The trail is going to change, and it's completely player driven what different buildings show up on the board and how things come out whenever you make a delivery in Kansas City. Varied experience, varied delivery locations, and different objectives that you can pursue make this for an experience where you're going to feel great about the upgrade paths that you're choosing and seeing play out during the game. And as a bonus recommendation, I want to recommend Clans of Caledonia for a game with interesting contract fulfillment. In this one, not only are you trading in resources for different rewards, but there's a variety in the rewards here. You're going to be getting money, you can build on tiles at a reduced land cost, you can get upgrades, and you can get straight hops, which are points, but you also have a very interesting variable amount of victory points that are associated to these imported goods: sugarcane, tobacco, and cotton. Whichever one has the most that has been imported is going to be worth the least amount of points. I think this is pretty cool because not only are you able to predict what other players are going to be selling and taking, but it's going to prioritize and strengthen the value of the different contracts that are available on the market. You may want to go out of your way to take a couple that provide specific imported goods. So great choices here with Great Western Trail as well as Clans of Caledonia are replacements for Merchants of the Dark Road. Our second Culled game on this list is Dune House Secrets. This is based off of the popular detective series of games where you're going to have this deck of cards that has interaction points. You'll use an app that also you'll interact with to try to make decisions and try to solve some form of problem and answer a bunch of questions at the end of your mission. In this game in particular, it's set in that Dune universe, so you're going to be taking all of these themes and ideas from the Dune novels as well as the movie, and you'll see how they portray with the new Harkonnen populating this area. I'm not going to get into any spoilers or anything like that because maybe you do have an interest in this game, but I do want to mention the negatives that I have in general so you know what you're getting into. The first thing that I have to mention is that there is so much Dune jargon in this game. If you are a Dune lover, if you really enjoy the books, if it's something that you've read a lot of, you're really versed with it, this may be a positive for you because you can hear someone mention a specific city on the map, a specific location, specific character, and you'd be like, oh, I know exactly what this means. That might be a positive. I'm a very casual Dune fan. I love the board games. I've watched the movie. I really enjoy the movie, but this is one that I could not break into. This was a chore to go back and reference and try to figure out exactly what they were talking about for the different story beats. Speaking of the story, I thought the story was very weak. It was not very compelling for me, and it felt very generic while being in that Dune universe, not something I was very interested in. Another negative is the app integration. I think apps are a wonderful way to do unique things with board games, and unfortunately, this does not do that well at all. I remember a specific time where you find a piece of information and it's on a card and says to go to the website and type in this card, and you do that, and then the thing that the website shows is literally just a wall of text that has been animated that you still have to read. I couldn't believe this. They literally could have just put this print on the card instead of making you do all these extra steps to read it. Mind-boggling, and a lot of it is like that. Super frustrating and very annoying. I don't know why they made this decision. There are so many neat things they could have done with the different holocrons and all of the imagery in the Dune universe, and it just didn't happen, particularly in the first chapter. And I want to be very specific with you. After this first chapter, Ariana and I were playing through this, and we didn't want to continue. We thought about it. We said, is this anything we want to go through with anymore? And we just said no. We did not even want to play it again. It was that disappointing for us this first playthrough. You may enjoy this if you're a diehard Dune fan, but for me, it is not one that is staying in our library, that's for sure. Now, my replacement for this game is the original Detective. I think the original Detective series is incredible, especially the LA campaign, the original campaign, and then all of the small boxes so far I've really enjoyed. So I really recommend Detective, a modern crime board game. It's what the Dune board game is based off of, and for good reason. The location system makes sense. You have to move to different places to investigate different areas, costing you time. You have that deck of cards that you are not going to get all the way through, and it's up to you and your decisions on what information you get, as well as what you pursue further. I love that it's got an overarching story, but if you want to, you can also play the single-shot missions, so you can choose that commitment level, and the overall narrative, as well as the app integration, and the actual use of the website and real-world areas gives you a way to contextualize your experience and make it for a very memorable one. I think that Detective, a modern crime board game, is the best detective-style game on the market. I think it's one that you need to give a try. So that is Detective, a modern crime board game, our replacement for Dune House Secrets. The next Culled game is Adventure Time Love Letter, where you're trying to end the round with the highest card in hand or eliminate the rest of the other players. Now, I love the Adventure Time theme, and I love how they're dressed all fancily, have their roses, have their props, and I just think that this is a wonderful little package. However, unfortunately, the simplicity and the lack of variance in the gameplay meant that Adventure Time Love Letter had to go. And the big reason is the new love letters that they've been releasing are pretty dang amazing. So I don't really have a lot of big issues with Adventure Time Love Letter. I think that core system is very solid, but it just has no variance that others do in this same series. The two differences for this edition of Love Letter are that if you have a 4 in your hand at the end of the round, you get an extra point because they're cute little mascots. And also, if you play a 5 and discard another 5, those are Finn and Jake, the main characters of the show, so you'll be able to get an extra point because you're adventuring, it's awesome. Now that is not enough to really make this a special or different game, but these two other replacements for the game are just other versions of Love Letter that add something unique and interesting. The first one here is Infinity Gauntlet, a Love Letter game. This is actually a one versus all game where one player plays as Thanos, and you'll have this deck of Thanos cards, and then the other players play as the heroes. And instead of just trying to end the round with the highest card, you're trying to defeat each other by taking them out. The Thanos player has a deck of a variety of different cards. They have the stones, and they also have their set of Black Order members. So you may have one number that's represented by multiple cards. This plays out surprisingly thematically to the Avengers versus Thanos fight. You'll have the Avengers playing one card after another, trying to set up combos and attacking Thanos. And Thanos has some cool choice as well, because he actually has a bigger hand size and has two distinct win conditions, either reducing the hero's health to 0 or playing out all of the Infinity Stones and winning immediately. I love that each of the Infinity Stones in the Thanos deck is a take on one of the other types of cards. Like Proxima Midnight here, the 4 says take a power token, but the Power Stone just straight up says take 3 power tokens. So it's really fun to just play an awesomely powerful card, and it's an Infinity Stone, so you know it's powerful. Thematic and fun. I really like this version of Love Letter. But I have one more bonus edition of Love Letter for you. That is Star Wars Jabba's Palace. This is more traditional Love Letter style, where you're trying to have the highest card in your hand at the end of the round, but you can actually change that win condition. There is a scheme card here. This Exalted one says highest number in hand wins the round, but that could potentially be something like whoever has played the most orange cards in front of them, or whoever has the highest orange and green card in their hand at the end of the round. So it actually changes based on each game that you play what that win condition is going to be. There's also a variety of different cards in the deck, some that are Rebel cards and some that are the Jabba the Hutt cards, and I like that they all have different effects and they interact interestingly with one another. There's some cool ways to score extra victory points throughout the round, and then effects that you need to be aware of that potentially may show up throughout the game, so it's very scary on when to hold cards and when to play cards. I think this is a great change up, and I think it adds that variety that original Adventure Time Love Letter was missing. So those are our replacements for that short little micro game for Love Letter, and unfortunately Adventure Time Love Letter's got to go, but luckily we have Jabba's Palace as well as Infinity Gauntlet. Up next we have Familiar Tales, and this is the one I'm actually the saddest about, because Plaid Hat Games puts out games with incredible voice acting, and it's my favorite experience just listening to these people who are wonderful at the craft, and some of my favorite voice actors are in these games. But unfortunately Familiar Tales has to go, because playing the actual game of Familiar Tales was becoming a barrier to me actually enjoying the story. In Familiar Tales, you play as a set of familiars. Your goal, without getting to any spoilers, is to make it through the different map pages, defeat the enemies, level up your characters, and ultimately protect the child. You have this child that'll go through, and then after era, that child will age up with your characters. This is a cool system, and I love the way that it introduces different story elements to the game and gives you different things to juggle. The character itself actually has its own card. You'll see this little baby card up here, and that will determine what these different markers do on the bottom. You have this discontent marker, which shows how upset the baby is. I think it's a great touch. I also really like the way that the map book opens up and has all the setup instructions, so it's very easy to get into a scenario. Another thing I really like is whenever you perform a test, you also have the symbols on the sides of these cards that will provide an additional ability. You can heal your characters, you can rerolls, and then some items or some characters will get additional effects based on matching symbols to whatever the cards that you've decided to upgrade with. This is some cool choices, and I think it makes for some interesting deck building in collaboration with the different items that you're collecting. Even with all those positives, there are two major negatives that are pretty intertwined that made it so that Familiar Tales is no longer staying in our library. It's already out, actually. The first one has to do with the slow, repetitive scenarios, and secondly is the enemy combat. Usually when you start a scenario, you'll populate the board with a bunch of enemies, and then you need to take them out, because if you don't, after a couple of turns, they're going to attack you. And when they attack you, you'll use cards in your hand to defend, but you don't draw up with that specific character until the end of their turn. So you gotta make sure that you're not discarding everything, but you probably should, maybe if you're close to dying, and if you do end up dying, your misfortune goes up, which ruins your score in the game, and it's also going to add fatigue cards into your discard pile, which make it so your deck's even worse the next time that you need to shuffle it. This is a downward spiral of failure, and it doesn't feel very good when you're having to waste your entire turn just to prevent one character from dealing damage to you. And on top of that, because of the volatility of these enemies, your choice now becomes, whenever they appear on the board, is you need to attack them, because if you don't, they're just going to continue attacking, and the attack of the characters just gets progressively stronger the more that you play the game. And because you're playing a deck building style of a game, you're not guaranteed to have any high defense cards in your character's hands every time that you shuffle their deck. So you're either going to be discarding a couple of cards to prevent damage if you drew well, or you could potentially discard your whole hand to stop a little bit of damage from coming into you. Now, this is only the enemy side of things. When it comes to the heroes actually attacking, you're going to be needing to discard cards in order to gain specific symbols to trigger the abilities on the items that you have. And this can take a while to get a lot of these symbols because you need to actually deck build and do so. It can be pretty frustrating when you've got a deck full of these symbols that don't match, or you've been taking a lot of damage and you've got even more fatigue cards, which add more misfortune, which means that the enemies are going to act even more frequently. A lot of the enemies also have high health totals, so you'll be slugging back and forth with these characters, and it can be pretty boring to just play a card, roll the die, play the card, roll the die, and just do this until one of you dies. So that is the combat, but then we get to the other scenario aspects. Generally, you're going to defeat the enemies until they're all gone, and that gives you free reign to explore the rest of the board. When you do so, you'll be going to different spaces, doing foraging actions, collecting resources, and there is no reason to not just collect everything that you see. Whenever you do a test, you have the potential for gaining experience, so you should be doing as many tests as possible, which can lead to very long play sessions as you make sure that you get to everywhere, explore every nook and cranny. This reminds me a little bit of a video game where you might go and explore every single room, except each of the rooms are just there and they're all the same test. Get a single resource, put into your thing, and you're cycling through your deck throughout. Most games provide some form of timer that's going to be pushing your characters forward, and this game does try to do that with the baby, who has the discontent marker that's supposed to be pushing you. However, on your turn as an action, you can care for the baby, and you can push the discontent down. And you can do this by discarding some of those resources, but one of the more common options is you can just pass a test, and once again, this can allow you to gain more experience, so why would you not just make sure that you're able to do this every time? You get a bunch of chances to do so, and then you'll be getting a lot of experience. It means that your gameplay is going to come to a halt, and it's going to be a grind the entire time. I never felt like any of these scenarios were particularly exciting or interesting, but the story itself I really did enjoy. So unfortunately, the story itself was not strong enough to keep this game in our library, and that repetitive combat as well as the grindy scenarios made it so that this was not an experience that I was excited to come back to at all. Luckily, there's a very easy recommendation to replace Familiar Tales, and that is Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion. This does a lot of the same things. You'll open up a scenario, you'll have some story to read, as well as different characters that you're moving around, enemies that you're fighting, as well as all of these items and other things that you can pick up throughout your adventures. However, this game has a consistent timer that is going to be pushing you throughout your experience in the form of your hand of cards. You have access to an entire hand of cards that you'll customize and pick and choose at the start of each scenario, and then each time that you need to rest, you'll get rid of one of those cards. Whenever you run out of cards in your hand or you run out of health, you are out. And so that's it. That's your constant choice of, do I pick up these items? Do I attack here? Do I take time to rest? And it's up to you to make that choice for yourself. Whereas the storytelling may not be as strong in Jaws of the Lion, there is a Foreteller app where you can actually hear the voice narration, but it does come at an extra cost. Overall though, the puzzle turns in Gloomhaven Jaws of the Lion are by far some of the best in the dungeon crawler genre. This is a huge recommendation for me, especially if you want to maintain that map board that you just full out, but if you're looking for a bigger experience with more interesting and more rewarding gameplay, I do recommend the original Gloomhaven over this one even more. And the last game for this video is Burgle Bros, and this is sort of a cheat because I still think Burgle Bros is a great game, but we replaced it with the sequel, and we'll talk about more about that in a second. In Burgle Bros, you play as a group of thieves trying to break into this 3-story building, break into a safe on each level, steal what's inside, and then get out of there. Burgle Bros is supported by an AI system that has guards patrolling each floor, and so after a player takes their couple of actions for their turn, the guard will move, and then it'll be the next player's turn. It has a very quick pace to it, and the variability is going to come from the different items that you collect, the different things that are actually in the safes, as well as the event cards that can come from different rooms. I love that there's a bit of a mystery to everything, and you have a lot of time and freedom to do things, but you'll see that the game does have that built-in timer with the guards, and it's always something that you're going to be aware of and afraid of. Burgle Bros is an incredible game, but Burgle Bros 2 is that and more. I really love the additions and changes that are implemented in this new version, and that's why we got rid of the old one. The first change is the streamlining of a lot of the systems in the game. First off, the guards, a little bit more streamlined with less fiddliness of ticking dice or moving things like that. You'll just have these alert markers that populate the board instead. You also have different ways that you'll be structuring different rooms, different effects, and you'll have these poker chips that become mini objectives that you're you're also trying to complete. There's only a single save, but there's also a control room, so you'll need to have people on both floors at a time in order to be able to do it as efficiently as possible. And the last change, and my favorite change, is the addition of scenario cards to the game. You'll have a card that tells you what you're actually trying to steal in the casino, and once you break into the safe, you'll flip it over and resolve some special ability. It'll introduce some new rules, new items, etc. It'll make for a surprising experience as you have to take the current situation you're in and then hopefully flee with the thing you've just stolen. When you open your box of Burgle Bros 2, you'll notice a lot of wooden components that aren't characters or any of the things that you normally see in the game, and that's because they're all tied to the different scenario cards. So you can only imagine what these things might do. I love that excitement and thinking to yourself, ooh, what is this going to translate to mechanism-wise, and I'm excited for when it finally shows up during the game. There's a lot of theme injected into each scenario, and I think Burgle Bros 2 is a complete package that's going to give you the best possible Burgle Bros experience. And that's it. Those are 5 more board games that left the library and what you should be playing instead. If you have any questions about any of the games I've talked about here, please let me know down in the comments below. I'd love to answer any of your questions regarding these games and regarding any of their replacements. Do you agree with any of the games that I talked about here? What did you think about my replacements? Are there any that you think are more appropriate? I'd love to hear what you think. But thank you so much for watching SideGame Strong.